In the quiet village of Makand, there lived a man named Juma. He was known all around for his strong hands and endless energy. Every morning before the sun rose over the hills, Juma was already in the fields, digging, planting, or harvesting. He believed hard work was the only secret to success. His wife, Nima, was gentle and wise. She helped him every day not only with her hands but also with her thoughts. She often saw things Juma did not notice, small signs in nature, changes in the wind, and whispers from the earth that only a careful heart could hear. One bright afternoon, Nima stood outside their hut, looking at the sky. The air felt heavy and still, and the clouds were turning dark gray. She walked to Juma, who was stacking baskets of maize near the field. "Juma," she said softly, "the clouds are heavy. We should store the maize before it rains. It will be too late if the river floods." Juma wiped sweat from his forehead and laughed. "Ah, Nima, you worry too much. The sun is still shining. I'll finish tomorrow. Look, the sky isn't even rumbling yet." Nima frowned a little. "The sky does not always rumble before it cries," she said. "Sometimes it weeps without warning." But Juma waved his hand. "You women always see problems before they come. I have farmed this land for many years. I know when the rain will fall." Nima wanted to argue, but she also knew Juma's pride was as strong as his back. So she sighed, covered the maize baskets with palm leaves as best she could, and went inside to prepare dinner. As evening came, the wind began to rise. It whistled through the trees and carried the smell of wet earth. Nima looked out again. The clouds had grown darker, almost black, and the first drop of rain splashed against her cheek. She ran out to Juma, who was still outside repairing a tool. "Juma," she called. "It's coming. Please come inside." Juma looked up at the sky, frowning. "It's just a few drops. It will pass," he said. But the sky had other plans. Within minutes, rain began to pour like a waterfall. The wind howled. Lightning flashed across the sky, and thunder rolled like the beating of drums in the hills. Juma ran toward the field, shouting, "My maize! My maize!" Nima caught his arm and pulled him back. "It's too late," she cried. "Come inside before you're swept away." The water rushed through the fields, turning the soil into brown waves. The baskets that Juma had left outside floated away one by one, vanishing into the darkness. He stood at the doorway, watching helplessly as days of work disappeared under the storm. By morning, the rain stopped and silence filled the village. The once green fields were now covered in mud. Broken stalks lay everywhere. Juma walked slowly across the ground, picking up bits of what was left. He felt tired not from work but from regret. Nima came beside him with a bowl of porridge. She didn't scold him, though she could have. She just said quietly, "The sky always warns before it cries, Juma. You only have to listen." Juma didn't answer. He knew she was right. He looked at her, her calm face, her patient eyes, and felt both shame and admiration. He remembered how she had spoken the truth so gently, without anger. He realized that her wisdom came not from books, but from paying attention to the world around her. Later that day, as they sat by the small fire, Juma said, "You were right, Nima. I should have listened. I lost the harvest because of my pride." Nima smiled softly. "You didn't lose everything," she said. "You still have the land, and the land can grow again. But next time, listen not just with your ears, listen with your heart too." Her words sank deep into him. Juma thought about all the times he had brushed off her advice, believing he knew better just because he was the man. Yet every time it was Nima who noticed the signs first. The sick goat before it fell ill, the wind before the rain, the smile of a neighbor hiding sadness. She saw things he didn't, not because she was smarter but because she cared to look closer. That night Juma could not sleep. The sound of the rain still echoed in his head. He watched Nima sleeping peacefully beside him and felt grateful. He finally understood that her words were not meant to challenge him but to protect what they both worked so hard for. When the sun rose again, Juma stood outside and took a deep breath of the fresh morning air. The sky was clear now, but the land was wet and heavy. He turned to Nima and said, "Let's start again. Together." Nima smiled. "That is the only way," she replied. From that day, Juma began to pay attention when Nima spoke. He learned to ask for her thoughts before making decisions. The people of Makan began to notice how their farm recovered quickly, and they admired the couple's teamwork. When the wind changed or the sky darkened, Juma no longer said, "It will pass." Instead, he would look at Nima and ask, "What do you think?" And she would answer with that same quiet wisdom that had always been there, the kind that listens to the whispers of the earth and the heartbeat of the sky. Though he had lost one harvest, Juma gained something greater, the understanding that strength alone cannot guide a man. Sometimes the softest voice in the house carries the loudest truth. And in the village of Makand, whenever the clouds gathered again, Juma was the first to cover his maze, smiling to himself and saying, "Nima's sky is watching." The rain did not stop. It poured and poured as if the sky itself had opened and decided to wash the earth clean. All night long the wind roared through the trees, bending them low to the ground. Lightning flashed across the hills, and thunder followed like the beat of a giant drum. The sound was loud enough to shake the huts in Makand. Juma could hardly sleep. Each time lightning lit up the room, he could see the worry on Nima's face. She sat by the window watching the dark clouds move across the sky. "It will pass soon," Juma muttered, though his voice sounded unsure. Nima said nothing. She quietly tied a cloth around her head and went outside to check on the goats. The rain hit her face like small stones, cold and sharp. She moved carefully, guiding the goats up to the small hill behind their hut, where the ground was higher. Juma stood at the door calling out, "Nima, come back inside. You'll get soaked." But Nima kept moving, her dress clinging to her legs, her hair dripping with water. When she finally returned, she was shivering but calm. "The goats are safe," she said softly. "We can't save everything, but we can save what we can reach." Juma nodded and looked out at the fields. The water was already crawling toward them, slow but steady. "It won't reach here," he whispered, as if saying it aloud would make it true. By morning the river had burst its banks. Water rushed through the village, carrying away sticks, baskets and even small plants. The fields that had once been golden with maize were now brown and wild with mud. Juma stepped out and gasped. The flood was stronger than anything he had ever seen. He tried to run to the barn, but Nima stopped him. "Juma, the water is too deep," she shouted. "You'll be swept away." But Juma's heart ached for his crops, his tools and all his hard work. "I can't just stand here," he cried. "Everything I worked for is out there." Nima's voice was firm. "You can rebuild, but I cannot rebuild you. Stay here." Juma stopped, breathing hard. Her words struck deep inside him. He watched helplessly as the muddy water swallowed the last of the baskets he had left outside. A wooden handle from his hoe floated by, followed by a broken gourd. The sight made his chest heavy. Hours passed. The rain continued to fall, softer now but steady. Villagers were shouting from their huts, calling to each other for help. A group of men tried to save what they could: chickens, firewood, cooking pots. But most things were lost. Nima worked beside Juma silently, packing their few dry items into a corner. She lit a small fire inside and placed stones around it so the flame would not die. The warmth filled the hut with a soft glow. Juma sat near it, staring at the water running under the doorway. "The sky always warns before it cries," Nima said quietly, stirring the fire with a stick. "It told us, Juma. The clouds spoke yesterday." Juma looked at her. He wanted to defend himself, to say that he didn't know it would be this bad. But he couldn't. The truth was clear and it was painful. He had ignored her, and now everything was gone. He dropped his head and whispered, "You were right." Nima smiled sadly. "I didn't want to be right. I only wanted us to be ready." The next day the rain finally stopped. The air smelled of wet earth and broken roots. The sun peeked through the clouds, weak and pale. Steam rose from the ground as the heat returned. The river, which had looked wild and angry, now looked tired. It moved slowly, carrying the remains of branches and leaves downstream. Juma walked to his field. The mud was thick under his feet, and every step made a squelching sound. He saw where the water had torn through the crops, leaving nothing but bent stalks and empty space. His tools were gone, his harvest destroyed. He sank to his knees in silence. Nima followed him, her bare feet leaving soft prints in the mud. She placed her hand on his shoulder and said, "The land will grow again. The river only took what was not protected. Next time we will listen to the wind and the clouds." Juma didn't speak, but her words comforted him. He realized that Nima had saved more than their goats. She had saved them both, by thinking ahead when he refused to see danger. He looked up at her and managed a small smile. "You have a strong heart, Nima," he said. "Stronger than mine." She laughed softly. "No, Juma. Not stronger, just different. You listen to the soil, I listen to the sky. Together we can hear everything." As they walked back home, Juma noticed how the village had changed. Some huts had fallen, and the ground was scattered with broken things. Yet people were already rebuilding. Children carried sticks, women fetched water, and men repaired fences. Life in Makan did not stop, it only bent like a tree in the storm, then stood tall again. That night the stars returned. The air was cool and fresh and the frogs sang by the river. Juma and Nima sat outside their hut, watching the moonlight dance on the wet ground. The silence between them was peaceful, filled with understanding. Juma turned to his wife and said softly, "I used to think listening made me weak. But today I see it makes me wise." Nima smiled and replied, "Listening does not take away your strength, Juma. It only gives it direction." He nodded slowly, feeling her words settle deep in his heart. He promised himself that he would never again let pride speak louder than reason. He would listen, truly listen, to the woman who had stood beside him through rain and loss. When he closed his eyes that night, he could still hear the sound of the river, calm now, whispering softly against the banks. It reminded him of Nima's voice, steady, gentle, and full of quiet truth. From that day forward, whenever the wind began to change or the sky turned gray, Juma would stop his work and look up. Then, before making a choice, he would turn to Nima and ask, "What do you think?" And Nima, with her calm eyes and knowing smile, would answer simply, "Let us listen to the sky first." In Makand, people soon noticed how Juma and Nima worked together. Their land healed faster than others, their animals stayed safe, and their harvest grew stronger than before. When others asked Juma his secret, he would grin and say, "It's simple. I learned to listen, not just to the land but to my wife." The villagers laughed, but they also nodded, for they knew it was true. The flood had taken Juma's crops, but it had left behind something far more valuable: wisdom. And from that day on, every time thunder rolled in the distance, the people of Makand remembered the lesson of Juma and Nima. When the flood finally ended, Makand slowly began to heal. The sun returned, bright and warm, and the villagers started planting again. The air smelled fresh and the ground, though still damp, was ready to give life once more. Juma woke early every morning, determined to rebuild what he had lost. He plowed the wet soil, lifted stones from the field, and cleaned his small barn. The memory of the flood still hurt him, but it also made him wiser. One afternoon, while Nima was cooking porridge under the shade of the big mango tree, Juma sat beside her, drawing lines in the dirt with a stick. "I will plant again," he said with a sigh. "This time I must choose carefully. We need something that will grow fast and sell well in the market." Nima smiled and said, "You are right. People always need food, especially now. But instead of planting cassava, why don't you try vegetables this time? Okra and tomatoes grow quickly, and the women in the market love them." Juma frowned. "Vegetables?" he said doubtfully. "Those are for small gardens, not real farms. Men buy cassava and maize. That's what sells." Nima chuckled softly. "You say men buy cassava, but who cooks in the homes? The women. They choose what to buy and they buy what their families love to eat. If you listen to the women, you'll never lose customers." Juma shook his head. "No, Nima. Cassava is strong and lasts longer. Vegetables spoil too fast. I'll plant cassava and maize again. It's safer." Nima didn't argue. She only said, "Do what you feel is best. But remember, the safest path is not always the most fruitful." Weeks passed. The fields turned green again. Juma's cassava plants grew tall and thick, their leaves dancing in the wind. He felt proud as he walked through the rows each morning. From the distance, he could see Nima tending a small corner of the garden. She had planted okra and tomatoes on her own, just a few rows behind the hut. Juma often laughed when he saw her. "You and your little farm," he teased. "Those plants will feed only the chickens." Nima would smile back and say, "Maybe. But even chickens deserve good food." When harvest time arrived, Juma filled basket after basket with cassava roots. He cleaned them carefully, ready for the market day. Nima's vegetables, too, had grown beautifully, red tomatoes shining like jewels and okra pods hanging heavy on the stalks. On Saturday morning, Juma loaded his donkey cart and set off to the market in the center of Makand. The road was busy. Women carried baskets of vegetables on their heads, children ran beside them, and the smell of roasted maize filled the air. Juma found a good spot near the main path and arranged his cassava neatly in a pile. Not long after, Nima arrived with her small basket of tomatoes and okra. She placed her mat nearby and greeted the other women. Juma smiled proudly at his large pile of cassava. "When they see my fine roots," he said, "they'll come running." The market grew noisy as people arrived. Buyers shouted prices, drums played in the distance, and traders called out their goods. "Fresh okra here. Sweet tomatoes. Come and see." The women crowded around Nima's mat first. They picked up the tomatoes, admired the okra, and smiled at her. "How much for a handful?" one asked. "2 coins, Nima said kindly. Take 3 and I'll add a small tomato for free. The women laughed and bought quickly. Soon Nima's small basket began to empty. Juma watched, expecting that soon his turn would come. But as time passed, people walked by his cassava without stopping. Some looked at it and said politely, "Not today, maybe next time." Others carried their vegetables and fish, smiling as they left. Juma called out louder, "Fresh cassava? Strong and clean." But still no one came. The sun grew hotter and his throat became dry from shouting. He looked across at Nima's mat. Her tomatoes were almost gone. Women surrounded her, chatting and laughing. She smiled and talked easily, her hands moving quickly as she sold the last of her okra. By the time the sun began to set, Juma sat on his stool, tired and silent. His baskets were still full. The few coins in his pocket rattled like dry seeds. Nima walked over with her empty basket, her face glowing with sweat and satisfaction. "You sold everything?" Juma asked quietly. "Yes," Nima said. The women said the tomatoes were sweet and the okra tender. "They want more next week." Juma looked down at his cassava. "No one wanted these," he murmured. "They all went for vegetables." Nima sat beside him. "People's hearts change after the rain," she said gently. "They want something fresh, something new. Cassava is good, but everyone has it. Vegetables bring color to their meals." Juma sighed. "You told me. I should have listened." Nima smiled and touched his arm. "It's not too late. Next time we'll plant together. Half cassava for safety, half vegetables for joy." On the way home the donkey cart was quiet. The only sound was the creaking of the wheels and the faint chirping of evening crickets. The sky turned orange and purple as the sun sank behind the hills. Juma watched the empty road ahead and thought about how Nima had been right again. When they reached home, Nima took some of his unsold cassava and boiled it for dinner. She added a few tomatoes she had saved and made a warm stew. As they ate, Juma laughed softly. "At least I can eat what didn't sell," he said. Nima giggled. "Nothing is wasted if it feeds the heart." Juma nodded slowly. "You always find wisdom in small things, Nima. I think I'm starting to see what you mean." The next morning, Juma woke earlier than usual. He walked to the small garden behind their hut where Nima had planted her vegetables. The air was cool and still and the leaves glistened with dew. He bent down, touched a tomato gently and smiled. When Nima came outside she saw him standing there with a thoughtful look. "What are you thinking?" she asked. "I'm thinking," Juma said, "that maybe this time we should grow what people need, not just what I want." Nima grinned. "That sounds like a good plan, Juma." From that day they worked together in the field. Juma dug the soil while Nima planted the seeds. They watered the plants side by side, laughing as they worked. The land seemed to grow happier too, full of life and color. When the next market day came, they both went together with baskets full of vegetables. People greeted them warmly, and by the end of the day their baskets were empty, and their hearts were full. Juma had finally learned that success was not only about strength or hard work, it was about listening, learning, and growing together. And every time Nima spoke, he made sure to listen carefully, because he now knew that her voice carried the wisdom of both love and experience. The sun had barely risen when Juma walked into the small shed behind his hut. Every morning he greeted his cow Binta with a cheerful pat and a handful of fresh grass. But that morning something was wrong. The cow stood still in the corner, her eyes half closed. She didn't move, didn't chew, and didn't make a sound. Juma frowned. He touched her gently, but she only gave a weak snort and turned her head away from the food. Juma called out, "Nima, come quickly." Nima hurried from the kitchen, wiping her hands on her cloth. When she saw the cow her face changed. "What happened?" she asked. "I don't know," Juma said, his voice tight with worry. "She didn't eat last night either. Maybe she's sick. I think I should sell her before she dies. At least we'll get something." Nima looked at him in surprise. "Sell her? Without even trying to help?" Juma sighed. "Nima, we can't afford to lose money. If she dies we get nothing. But if I sell her now, someone in the next village might pay for her. We can buy another later." Nima shook her head. "No, Juma. She's not dying. She just needs care. Her nose is dry and her stomach is tight. That means she's cold inside. Let me mix my herbs." Juma frowned. "Herbs? You think leaves will fix this? What she needs is a strong buyer, not a bowl of leaves." Nima didn't argue. She simply said, "Give me 1 day. If she doesn't get better, then you can sell her." Juma hesitated. He looked at the cow again, weak, tired, and barely standing. "1 day," he said at last. But if she gets worse, I'll take her to the market. Nima nodded and went to work. She gathered leaves from the back of their hut, bitter ones from the neem tree, soft green ones from the pawpaw plant, and a small handful of roots that she kept tied in a bag. She crushed them together with warm water, humming softly as she worked. The smell was strong, earthy, and sharp. When Juma saw the mixture, he wrinkled his nose. "That looks like medicine for witches, not cows," he said half-jokingly. Nima smiled. "Medicine is medicine, whether for man or beast. Sometimes what looks strange is what works best." She poured the warm mixture into a gourd and walked slowly toward Binta. The cow turned her head weakly. Nima whispered, "Easy now, girl," and gently lifted her chin. Bit by bit she helped her drink the herbs. The cow made a soft sound and swallowed. Nima rubbed her neck and said quietly, "You'll feel better soon." All day long Juma stayed close watching. The cow still refused to eat and his worry grew stronger. "Nima, I told you, this won't work," he said. "We're wasting time." But Nima only smiled calmly. "Patience, Juma. The body heals slowly like the sun after rain." That night, the wind blew softly, carrying the smell of wet earth. Nima checked on the cow again, covering her with a warm cloth. Juma lay in bed, unable to sleep. He listened to Nima's quiet steps outside and felt both doubtful and grateful. When morning came, the first thing he did was run to the shed. What he saw made him stop in surprise. Binta was standing tall, her eyes bright again. She was chewing fresh grass happily, her tail swishing from side to side. Juma's mouth fell open. "Nima," he shouted. "Come see." Nima came out, smiling even before she looked. "I told you," she said softly. She just needed warmth and healing. Juma walked closer to the cow, still amazed. "But how? Yesterday she looked ready to fall. What did you do?" Nima wiped her hands and replied, "Sometimes animals, like people, lose their strength when the season changes. The cold wind weakens them. The herbs warm their blood and calm their stomachs. She only needed a little help." Juma laughed softly and shook his head. "Nima, your eyes see what mine cannot." Nima smiled and said, "That's because you look with worry and I look with care." Later that day Juma took the cow out to graze. As he watched her walking happily across the field, he felt something deep in his chest, not just relief but respect. He remembered how quickly he had wanted to sell her, to give up, just to avoid loss. But Nima had seen hope where he saw trouble. Her patience had saved the animal. That evening as they sat by the fire, Juma told her, "I have learned something today. Strength is not always in rushing. Sometimes it's in waiting." Nima nodded. "And listening," she added gently. Juma smiled. "Yes, listening." The next week, the villagers began talking about Juma's cow. Many had heard she was sick and were surprised to see her healthy again. One man, Musa, came by and asked, "Juma, I heard you were going to sell her. What changed your mind?" Juma looked toward Nima, who was drying herbs in the sun, and said proudly, "My wife. Her hands and heart healed what my eyes could not see." Musa laughed. "Ah, you are lucky, my friend. Not every man listens to his wife." Juma grinned. "Maybe that's why not every man has a healthy cow." As days passed, Binta grew even stronger. She gave more milk than before and her coat shone in the sunlight. Juma began to help Nima gather herbs, curious to learn what she knew. "How do you tell which leaves to pick?" he asked one day. Nima smiled. "Each leaf has its own song. Some sing for fever, some for pain, and some for hunger. You just have to listen closely." Juma chuckled. "You talk like the forest speaks to you." "It does," she said quietly. "If you listen long enough, everything speaks, the wind, the river, even the cows." Juma thought about that for a long time. He realized that Nima's wisdom came from paying attention to the small things, things he had ignored because he was always focused on work. He had learned to use his hands well, but she had learned to use her heart. Together they made a perfect balance. One afternoon, Juma found Nima preparing more herbs. "Is another animal sick?" he asked. "No," she replied with a smile. "I'm making medicine for the village. The other women want to learn too." Juma looked at her proudly. "You're teaching them?" "Yes," Nima said. "If my herbs can save our cow, maybe they can help others. Wisdom grows when it is shared." That night, as they sat outside under the stars, Juma spoke softly, "Nima, I used to think I was the one who knew everything about this farm. But now I see that you understand life better than I ever did." Nima laughed. "No, Juma. You know the land. I just listen to what it whispers." He smiled and took her hand. "Then I will start listening too." From that day forward, Juma and Nima worked side by side, not just as husband and wife, but as true partners. When the animals fell sick, they treated them together. When the plants wilted, they studied the soil and the sky before acting. And soon their farm became the healthiest in Makand. The villagers began to say, "If your cow is sick, go to Juma and Nima. They know what to do." And Juma would laugh and say, "I only dig the holes. The real wisdom comes from my wife." He never forgot that morning when he almost sold his cow out of fear. It reminded him that patience, love, and listening could save more than just a life, they could save a way of living. And each time he saw Binta grazing happily, he would smile and whisper to himself, "Nima's eyes see what mine cannot." The sun rose gently over the green fields of Makand. Birds sang, and the soft breeze carried the smell of wet soil after an early morning drizzle. Juma walked through his farm with a calm smile on his face. The maize stood tall, the vegetables glowed in the sunlight, and the animals grazed happily in the distance. Behind him, Nima followed with a small basket, picking ripe tomatoes. Life had changed for them. The days of argument and pride were gone. Juma no longer hurried to prove himself right. Instead, he listened, not just with his ears but with his heart. He had learned that wisdom did not always shout. Sometimes it came in gentle words spoken with love. That morning Nima said, "The ground is still wet, Juma. Wait before you plant the next seeds." He nodded easily. "You're right. We'll wait until the soil warms a little." Nima looked at him with surprise and smiled. "You never used to agree so quickly." Juma chuckled. "That was the old Juma. The new one has learned that the sky, the soil, and a wise woman all speak truth, if you listen long enough." Nima laughed softly, shaking her head. "You make me sound like an old teacher." "You are," Juma said. "And I am your best student." As the day passed, neighbors came by to borrow tools and share news. One young man named Baraka, newly married and full of pride, watched how Juma and Nima worked together. He asked, half teasing, "Juma, how do you manage to agree with your wife on everything?" "My own wife talks too much. I tell her, 'Let me handle it, woman,' but she never stops advising." Juma laughed and wiped the sweat from his brow. "Ah, Baraka, I used to say the same thing once. I thought listening made a man weak. But now I know a wise man listens, not because his wife is loud, but because her heart whispers truth." Baraka frowned, confused. "You mean you believe every word she says?" Juma smiled. "No, not every word. But I listen to understand, not to argue. Sometimes what she sees I cannot." Her eyes noticed the small things, the color of the sky before the rain, the sound of a sick cow, or the way the soil feels before planting. "Her heart understands the rhythm of this land better than I ever could alone." Baraka scratched his head. "So you think that's why your farm looks better than all of ours?" Juma looked over his land and nodded slowly. "The farm grows because peace grows first. When a man and woman walk together, even the crops feel it. But when they fight, the earth stays silent." Nima, standing nearby, laughed gently. "Don't tell him that, Juma, or he'll think I can talk to the plants." Juma winked. "Maybe you can. Look how they listen to you." Baraka laughed, shaking his head. "I'll tell my wife what you said, but she'll use it to make me do more work." "Then you'll both win," Juma replied with a grin. "When you work together, there is no loss." That evening, after the neighbors left, Juma and Nima sat by the fire. The stars glimmered above them like small lamps hung by invisible hands. The night air was cool and the smell of roasted maize filled the air. Juma stared into the flames and said softly, "Do you know, Nima, sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I had never listened, if I had sold the cow or ignored your words during the flood." Nima smiled. "Maybe we would still be struggling. But the past is gone, Juma. What matters is that you changed." He nodded slowly. "I changed because I saw your wisdom. You never shouted, never forced me. You simply waited until my pride grew tired." Nima laughed gently. "I knew one day you would learn. The earth teaches the same lesson, it rewards those who are patient." Juma looked at her, his eyes warm. "Then I will be patient for the rest of my days." They sat in silence for a while, listening to the crickets and the crackle of the fire. Peace lived in their home now, not because everything was easy but because they faced every challenge together. As months passed, Juma became known in Makand as a man of wisdom. Young farmers came to him for advice. But whenever they praised him, he would always say, "Talk to Nima too. She sees what I miss." One day the chief of the village invited them to a small gathering. He said, "Juma, your farm feeds many. Your animals are healthy, and your name carries respect. What is your secret?" Juma smiled and looked at Nima before replying, "My secret is no secret at all. It is listening. The land speaks, the rain speaks, and my wife speaks. I used to hear only myself, but now I listen to everything. The chief nodded slowly. Wise words, Juma. The village needs more men who think like you. After that day, people began calling them the wise couple of Makand. They were not rich in gold or silver, but they were rich in peace. Their laughter filled the air each morning, and their kindness spread across the village. One afternoon, a group of children ran through their farm, chasing butterflies. Juma called out playfully, "Careful. You'll step on the young maize." The children stopped and looked shyly at him. "Sorry Mzee Juma," one boy said. Juma smiled and handed them each a tomato from Nima's basket. "Take this. Remember, everything that grows deserves care, even the small ones." As the children ran off laughing, Nima said, "You speak like a teacher now." Juma laughed. "Maybe you're rubbing off on me." That night, the moon rose full and bright. Juma and Nima sat under a mango tree, their hands touching lightly. The world was quiet except for the gentle hum of the night. Juma whispered, "Do you know what I love most about our life now?" Nima turned to him. "What?" "That we no longer argue with the world. We listen to it." She smiled. "And it listens back." Years later, when people told stories about the couple from Makand, they always ended the same way. Juma was strong but Nima was wise. And together they grew not just crops, they grew peace. Even as age painted their hair silver and slowed their steps, their love remained gentle and sure. When young men joked in the market about ignoring their wives, Juma would grin and say, "My friend, a wise man listens, not because his wife is loud but because her heart whispers truth." Then he would look toward Nima with a smile that carried years of respect and quiet love. And in the heart of Makand, their story became a living lesson, that pride may grow fast like weeds, but wisdom grows deep like roots.